Hello, everyone. My name is Grant Ohms. I am the Well Planning Product Specialist. And in this presentation, I'm going to go over the new features that we've added to decision-based well planning for 10ep.3. So to kind of start off with what we wanted to deliver with this release is we wanted to improve automation. We have a lot of the multi-well planning, automated targeting and planning workflows, but we wanted to keep building upon that prior success, and we wanted to address some of those small gaps in customer workflows. We do 80% extremely quickly. We want to get that closer to the finish line. And then lastly, we made some minor UI changes to build upon what we've accomplished in 10ep 1 and 2. So to start off with those small usability enhancements, we've added step size changes for the numerical spinners. So for anything that has an up or down arrow to change the toe heel spacing, northing easting requirements, you can use the shift plus the up or down arrow to change that step size. So if it was 100 feet, you can do shift up to go up to 1,000 or 10,000 feet, or shift down to go to 10 or single foot increments. And then also we added the multi-well planning to the well planning menu bar. When we did testing with a lot of our customers, we realized that ended up being the first place they looked for the multi-well planning. So we added the icon and the option to open it from the well planning menu bar. There'll still be the icon in the toolbar for the well planning perspective, and then it will also be able launch it from the quick access like always. So some of the new features that we added, this was to build upon something that we added for 10ep.2. You'll now be able to replan selected sites only. So the workflow for this was you could import targets and sites with the ASCII loaders, and then it would auto-generate these plans for you. So with this, you'll be able to replan only selected sites. So you can select 1 or 2 sites in your inventory, and it will replan all of the targets for those selected sites. So you can change the azimuth value, you can change the well spacing, whatever requirements that weren't reflected in those ASCII files. We also added the azimuth option to the plans table, so you can now rotate all of your plans from this well plans table. So you have a list of all your plans down at the bottom, and you can go into the column manager to add the azimuth field to all the other options that we have available. And then you just input your new azimuth, and it will rotate your targets around either the surface location, or if you don't have one defined, it'll use the first target point. So since I just have heel and toe stubs, it's going to rotate all of my targets around that heel. Another option that we've added to the automated multi-well planning workflow is you can now select a reference site when you're defining your surface locations. So if you have pre-existing surface locations already drilled and completed, then you can use those as a reference point, and it will pattern the rest of your new surface locations around that point. So to kind of show this, I created 3 surface locations that I picked here, 1, 2, and 3. And then I referenced site number 3, and it created a pattern. It's in line with this site 3 that I've selected. So this will make planning access roads and pipelines easier when everything's laid out in nice rows and columns for your surface locations. So to kind of show an alternate, here's it with the reference to site 2. You can see that the offset site is in line with it, and then it's changed. So those were kind of the basic things that we did. Now these are kind of the bigger stories. Major one here is we've made some big changes to the horizontal targeting. And in the past, we had a heel and toe, and they would always be at a fixed target depth. This wasn't very helpful with this complex geology that we're seeing more customers move towards. So how can we create this targeting to stay in our formation better? So we did a number of different things to help accomplish this. So the first one was creating a depth window. So instead of having a fixed target depth, you'll now input a min and max range. So if you have references to 2 surfaces, you can say stay between 20 to 80% between those two surfaces. If you have a single surface reference, then you can say 100 to 150 feet below this formation top. To add to that, then you also have to have a way to calculate the waypoint targets. So a flat heel and toe target is not going to be enough. You have to determine along that horizontal section how to stay in your formation better. So we've added an option to optimize that, so it will calculate the number of waypoint targets to stay within that drilling window. And then to make it more worthwhile to the drilling engineers, we've added inclination-based drilling restrictions. We've added some inclination-based drilling restrictions, so you'll define the total dogleg that you want to see over your horizontal section, and then you'll define an optimum inclination and range that you'd like to stay in between. So to kind of show the new UI, this is the horizontal targeting profile. So this is where you define the layers of targets you want and the depths that you want those targets to be at. So the new options are these highlighted in red. So you select the optimized targets option at the top. It will calculate the number of targets that you need to stay within your formation. Then you define the total dogleg, optimum inclination, and a range, plus or minus. Once you have that defined, then you can skip down to the bottom, and then you can define the min and max between two surfaces or a min and max range below a single surface. So what you'll end up seeing is something along these lines, where you have the light blue, that was the more traditional way of the targeting. You have a fixed target depth, 50% between those two formations, and then it just connects the dots, those 2 points. With the new targeting method, you define a window, so it placed our heel deeper, and then it calculated the number of targets to kind of follow that formation. So that way we stay within that range. So I have a video to show this off. So I've got two formations here. I've got a top and a base, and I'm going to set up 50% between these two formations. So there's my two formations, and then my create targets. So we see that it's created a heel and a toe target, and it's drilled through our basement for a portion of this well. So that's going to reduce productivity, and it's going to make this well less cost efficient. I'm going to select the new optimized targets option here at the top. So that's going to calculate the number of waypoint targets to stay within my drilling window. I'm going to keep my targets, those same two formations, basin, Cretaceous, and interval. Now I'm going to define the drilling restrictions there. So total dogleg over the course of the well, and then the optimum inclination I'd like to see. Once I've got those defined down up there, I'll move to my distance between two surfaces, and I'll define the percentage that I want to stay within those two formations. So 20 and 80, and once I have everything defined, I create the targets here. Change the color, so that way we can see the difference. There we go. So we can see that it's created 4 targets to help us stay within this formation. And we have placed our heel and our toe a little higher up in the formation to help us kind of stay within this productive zone. Moving on to the next feature, target assignment. You can now MB3 targets or plans within the tables, and you can now assign those two plans, targets to plans from those two tables. So you'll no longer be required to do the whole drag and drop workflow in the inventory. So if you MB3 on a target, it will give you this pop-up dialog, and it will list off in that drop-down all of the plans that are within reach of for that surface location. And then we've added a checkbox if you want to add it as a reference point, so that way it doesn't affect your trajectory, but you still have that target assigned to the plan as kind of a reference point. And then you can do the same thing in the plans table, MB3, for a single plan, and it will list off all of the targets that are within range. And then it will also list distance, azimuth, and TBD. And you can sort and filter by that, so that way you can select those targets and then assign them in drilling order. I have another video to show this off. So in this session, I've just created a bunch of random targets and surface locations. Surface locations are the X's, targets are the plus signs. You can see. So in the plans table, there's a list of all my plans. Got about a dozen there, surface locations, and then I've got a bunch of targets as well. And they're all unassigned since they're in gray, the icon. So now if I select one of these plans here, I can mouse button 3, and I can manage those plan targets. And here's a list of all the targets that are within the reach that's defined in the Windows preferences. So there's a list of all the targets that are within that reach. I can sort and filter by distance there, and azimuth, and TBD as well. And then it's just a matter of selecting the targets that I want to hit, and then moving them over to the right. And it automatically creates a plan using those same defaults in the preferences. So if I selected another target, then it would be added to the list, and it would hit target 2, and then it would hit the next target after that. So it would string them along. Yep, and you can select the checkbox there to add as a reference target. So that way it won't be used as part of the trajectory. It's a reference point. Let's skip ahead a few seconds and move on to the targets. So we see that since target 2 is now assigned, it's in yellow. And I'm going to select target 3, and I'm going to assign that to a plan. This is a little simpler dialog. Just list off all the plans that are within reach. So I can then just select one of those plans there. And I can hit apply, and it automatically updates in my map. So if I selected another one, I can still assign it to that same plan, and it will string it along. Next, we added categories for the well planning inventory. So with large well planning scenarios and projects, we saw a lot of our customers having difficulty managing the inventory. When you have hundreds of boundaries and hazards, thousands of targets, dozens of surface locations, and all the plans that are associated to those as well. So we wanted something to help us manage that more easily. So what we decided was you could create subfolders basically based on the type. So instead of having all of our boundaries listed off in under one heading, we'll break those up. So all of our unit boundaries are in a separate box. Setbacks for everything will be in another box. And then being able to define subsurface versus surface hazards and keeping those separate. And that way, when they're all grouped together, then you can also toggle the visibility for each one of those groups separately. Got another video. So in this session, I've got 2 surface locations already defined. I've got a framework here that I'm going to be using to create a bunch of targets for. And then I drew a single boundary line around my entire framework to kind of define everything. And you can kind of see it there in purple. Surface locations, and there's my plan. So I'm targeting multiple formations down there as well. So if we look over on the left with our well plan inventory, we just have a single well plan, the boundaries and sites there defined. So now I'm going to take that single boundary that we have, and I'm going to break it up into square mile blocks. I'm going to put in some variables, select my boundary, hit apply, and yeah, that type is how it will be reflected in your inventory. So you define that type, and then it'll create all these units with that type suffix, and it will group them in the well planning inventory. You can see we've got about 24 unit boundaries here. If we look over on the left, there's our boundary 1, our original boundary, and then all those units are now grouped together under a separate header. So if I expand that, that'll be the 24 units that we have. It's one of those square mile blocks. So then to build upon that, we can also create setbacks for each one of these units. So I select all the units. I'm going to create setbacks for those. We're going to define the primary and secondary setback distances there. Visual check, make sure it all looks right. And just like before, the type feature, you define that as setback. And when we finish, it will group those all under boundaries hyphen setback. So there's all of our setbacks for each one of our units. And we can see that they're all now, those 24 are grouped under the setback option as well. So that's the basics for boundaries. So this can also be applied to hazards as well. So I'm going to just draw a surface hazard here. Say there's a school zone. I want to place a rig near active school zone. So you can define that surface there. It shows up there as a hazard 1. And then we also have a fault plane that we want to avoid. So I'm going to create a hazard from a fault. I can select my fault that's in my Earth model, and I can define the type. And with the low resolution, it's just going to create a single hazard around the entire fault. And if we look back at our cube view, there's our hazard. So since I defined it with a type as fault, then it added the suffix onto the header information there for hazards. And then lastly, unassigned targets can have different types as well. So I'm going to create a 9-point pattern here for one of my setback boundaries, and I've defined an injector type and a producer type. So I colored them green and red. When I create my targets, I've got unassigned injectors and producers there. And when we move to the map, we can zoom in and we can see there's my producers and injectors. And then the very last feature that we've got added is eNotes. So eNotes was something that we had in 8.3 and .10, and it's now available for 10ep. So it will be bundled with the rest of the well planning perspective, and it will no longer be a separate install like it was in the past. You will still have a separate license file that will be required to utilize this. And if for those that are unfamiliar with eNotes, it's engineering notes, and it was the link between OpenWorks and EDM, the drilling database. And this will allow you to visualize your morning reports alongside your OpenWorks wells. So you could create queries for the EDM database. You could find MPC events or whatever information that you were interested in, and then visualize those in decision space in the 3D cube. Got one last video. So here's a list of OpenWorks wells that I've already created the link in EDM for. So to kind of set this up, you'll have to be using EDM 13 or 14.1.2 to utilize this. We've also got a hotfix for 10ep.2. So EP202, this was also added to that. So if you, for our users that already have EP2, there's a quick hotfix so you can take advantage of this as well. So to set this up, I've added the OpenWorks wells, I've linked them to EDM, and I've also created the data analyzer queries. So I've set that up, set those up, and we can see here in the add data, those are the KM queries that I've added on the EDM side. So I'm looking at fishing, milling, reaming, stuck pipe, and well control events that occurred for these group of wells. So once I've run the queries on the EDM side, I can visualize them here, and I can add them to my session, and there they are. So each one of these icons represents different activity. So there's stuck pipe, fishing, mill out. Those are for back reaming operations. And if we look over on the right, there's a green one that's covered up a little bit, and that's going to be lost circulation. So I can visualize all these events along the wellbore and see kind of what the measured depth that each one of these occurred at. And with this, I can mouse button 3 on a cube and open that knowledge attachment, and I can get the details. What's the exact depth? And I can read about the comments that the actual rig operator made in his report. And then I can also add my own additional comments as well. So this is a major issue. I want to be aware of this for future planning. And detailed information there about it's coming from the Open Wells daily reports. Then we can also attach additional evidence. So if there was any photographs taken at the rig site or other evidence, you can link a file to that with a description to be tied to this knowledge attachment as well. If I wanted to see all the details for all of my wells that I have, I can open up the KM details from the utilities, and here's a list of all of the events that occurred with comments as well and the measured depth. If I'm only interested in a single well, I can just select that one well, and I can see all of the events that occurred. And I can double click on it to open up the details. So one of the upsides to this is it's also tied to the well planning. So when you run your analysis, you can visualize all these cubes. You can, if you notice a pattern, you can then also create KM details for your plans as well. So that way you can set up kind of a warning system for future drilling. So in this example, I'm going to pretend that we had a stuck pipe at this measured depth for a number of the other wells. So we want to make sure that we're aware of this before reaching that point for our plan. So I'm going to create a knowledge attachment here, looking at the details of the original one to get an idea of the depth. And then going to go up to the utilities, plan KM details, and I'm going to create a new one for this plan. Put in a depth. I'm going to assign a code. That way the icon is reflected. Add some user comments here. So I'm going to warn the rig operator when we start approaching this depth. Seeing a lot of stuck pipe issues. Let's be on the lookout, see what we can do to change our business as usual. So there's our original, there's our new plan. And then the very last thing I'm going to show is just the display properties for this. So if you have lots of cubes right next to each other, you can change the cube size as well. So that way they're smaller. You can zoom in to see those better. And if they're really close together, you can kind of get a better idea of where each one of these cubes is located. So that is everything that I have planned for today. It's everything I will be delivering for 10ep.3.